Storyteller Sunday, and today is, we only have one guest, so it's gonna go a little longer than the 15 minutes that we normally have, probably more in the 25-minute range, but today we have a new friend of mine and a new friend to this church who's here today that we wanna welcome. He's got an amazingly interesting story, very, very, very smart guy who's just had a lot of different experiences, and I'm excited for you to hear his story. I don't see him. Oh, there he is in the back. Will you guys welcome Steven Pynakker? Please come with props.
Oh, yes, of course I'm going to bring a prop.
Yeah, there you go. Here's a mic for you.
Thank you, my brother.
Yeah. Y'all ready for this? So let me set this up with Steven here. Steven came when Timothy Whitaker was here. From New Evangelicals, and I'll let him give you the cliff notes of his story of how he got to that point. But Steven is, so he doesn't have to brag on himself, because I know he doesn't like doing that, but Steven is seen now as, has one of the most popular podcasts specifically dealing with and speaking to the Mormon community, and now starting to cross over into the kind of ex-evangelical community. And there's a major exodus that's been happening in the Mormon faith too, of people that have left the Mormon faith and are looking just to kind of land somewhere in their faith world. And so he's become a bridge between the evangelical community and the Mormon community. And you may not understand why that's significant, and in a moment I'll have him tell you, but it's a very significant thing because for generations, the evangelical community and the Mormon community have oftentimes been at great odds with one another, even to the point of death. Did you know that? Even to the point of death. There's been those kind of clashes and issues between the two communities. And so for such a time as this, Steven found himself kind of randomly in this. But I want to start, if we can, from your childhood and then how you kind of discovered and became interested in the Mormon faith.
All right, well, thanks, Pastor. I really appreciate this. It's funny, I have a pastor now, and I haven't had one for a very long time. So
what a pick.
And so, yeah, basically, just a long story short, when I was an 8-year-old boy, I came across a Book of Mormon in a Marriott hotel, which is owned by a Mormon family. And I came across these paintings that depicted stories from the Book of Mormon, and they entranced me. And I thought, this seems familiar to me. It looks like the Bible, but it's something different. And that planted the seed in me about those paintings. I would later find out that those paintings were commissioned in the 1950s specifically to reach out to children. So it got, a major Mormon scholar told me this. He said, so apparently it worked for you. So I was entranced by this idea of this other group that was like us, but also different. And then when I was in high school, I started collecting books, mostly as a counter-cult, gotta save these Mormons from hell. But I also had a parallel faith journey, and I guess I could just talk about that too. It was also around the same time that I discovered Mormonism, I also discovered that I was attracted to other boys. So here I am, a gay, closeted male in an evangelical world that is very hostile to somebody like me. And then also an evangelical world that's extraordinarily hostile to Mormonism. And so as I started studying Mormonism, I actually started, if you will, falling in love in one sense with Joseph Smith. Not in a gay way, but just in a human way, a connection to a man. And part of it was, as I was a young boy, I was looking at the world and thinking, what this world needs is another Bible, because it seems like the Bible we have now ain't working anymore. And then I found out about this other young boy, 200 years before me, that engaged other scriptures and gave us, if you will, another Bible. And it was an intriguing thought that maybe scripture could be revealed even in modern times. Now, as a charismatic Christian, I don't believe in one sense that we can limit God and how he'd want to communicate to us. And I think it's actually a Catholic doctrine that says that the canon is closed. And so for me, it was like the idea of possibilities of new scripture wasn't a foreign idea to me. So I'm going
to stop you there.
Yeah.
What was it about the Bible in its form or in its interpretation or whatever it was that left you wanting more?
I think what it was is that it appeared to me that the world was, and again, this is just growing up, and you live in this siege mentality of evangelicals that, the world's out to get us, and the world's going to pot, and it's almost like, well, man, this Bible doesn't seem to be working anymore because the message isn't resonating with people like it did in the past. In America, like basically everybody had a knowledge of the Bible. Historically, it was largely a Christian nation, at least culturally. And it seems like we had a secularization going on where people weren't even knowledgeable of the Bible, or it wasn't compelling enough for them to even want to engage the scriptures. So as a young boy, I was thinking, do we need another scripture? Because this one doesn't seem to work. And I think that that's really honestly the context of Joseph Smith. He's the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and their prophet, seer, and revelator. And I really think that he was a young boy who saw all these claimants, we're the true church, we're the true church. And if you don't belong to our church, then you're going to hell. And this is, to me, is one of the most important points, pivotal moments in the history of our movements. So this is 1820s America. You're on the frontier, and it's also right during the Second Great Awakening period. So this is our people, right? Joseph Smith and his family attend tent revivals, okay? Joseph Smith, as a young man, was an exhorter for the Methodists. In other words, give an altar call at the end after the pastor. That's Joseph Smith, okay? So his older brother, Alvin, first of all, Joseph Smith apparently encounters these metal plates that are of ancient origin in his mind that tell a story about the inhabitants of this land. And his older brother, Alvin, was so excited about the prospect of this thing and was his biggest backer. Well, then suddenly Alvin suffers apparently a poisoning or got very sick, ends up dying. So there's this Presbyterian minister goes to the Smith family and says, your brother Alvin is burning in hell because he didn't receive a Presbyterian baptism. And I tell people that's really the moment, in one sense, when Mormonism began, because Joseph Smith then went on a journey to try to find his brother, to get him back into heaven, to find a way to get him into heaven. And I think that's really one of the root causes of Mormonism, is this idea that this Presbyterian pastor had no business condemning another person to hell. That's bad doctrine, and that's bad evangelical Christianity, and all of us have been exposed to it. So now you have this young boy in this family. They're like, well, what do we do?
Well, let me stop you there. It's very interesting because evangelicals have a long history, and we're not bashing evangelicals, maybe a little, but anyways, the evangelicals have a long history of making a decision like that in a moment where we're so obsessed with who's in and who's out. Every major reformation that we have seen, usually in the faith, has started with the question of who's in and who's out. And then the church makes a decision of who's in and who's out, and somebody says, wait a second. And then what happens is that will offshoot into something else, some other stream, some other religion, some other faith, and then we'll be at war with that faith and complain why that popped up, but never take responsibility for the moment that we condemn somebody that then made that person go and search for something new and beyond. And then this hostility grows, not realizing that had we just saw the person as a human being and not trying to figure out where they fit into the box of heaven or hell, we would have probably Joseph Smith would have continued to be a Methodist in this case.
Yeah, and honestly, we lost a wonderful human being that could have been a great leader in our movement because he was a remarkable man. I'm wearing a Joseph Smith for President t-shirt. Imagine a scenario. You have a candidate from Illinois who's running for president on an anti-slavery ticket, wants to essentially abolish prisons and make them centers of learning, and is kind of probably the first proto-Zionist candidate for president.
And when was that?
This was in 1844, and his name was Joseph Smith. And he wore a top hat just like Abraham Lincoln was. Joseph Smith, in one sense, was a John the Baptist to Abraham Lincoln. And he, by the way, was also assassinated. The very first presidential candidate ever assassinated on American soil was Joseph Smith.
Wow. You're learning something today, aren't you? That's amazing. So you got into learning about it with the idea that you're going to convert Mormons to Christianity or evangelical world. How did that progress, and where did you go with that as time went on?
Well, so I thought to myself, okay, I have this blind spot. I hear there's these great Christian apologists are doing battle in the arena, and they're going up against those atheists and college professors, and they're showing them that Christianity is true, and I just figured that's good for them, and I never paid any attention to atheism. So then I'm like, God, Paul tells us we should have a ready answer. So I need to start studying Christian apologetics. And I pick up Josh McDowell's book, New Evidence Demands the Verdict. And within about a minute or two of me opening that book, I was like, Houston, we got a problem. Because as I was reading these Christian apologetics materials, I recognized immediately that this is not meant for people who are not believers. These materials are meant to keep people in the church. They're just good enough answers. But they weren't good enough answers for me, because I recognized if somebody was an outsider and they saw this, they'd be like, this isn't convincing at all. So then I'm like, oh boy, what am I going to do? Well, now I need to study science, because I went to Christian schools. I was taught young earth creationism, all the kind of stuff, all the typical evangelical stuff, all the baggage that many of us carried in our lives. And so I need to learn about biological evolution, about science, and what these things really are, and not as they have been kind of portrayed to me by the materials that I was learning from, like a Becca and the Bob Jones University Press and all that kind of stuff that were making our materials, which was all young earth creationism. Once I recognized that there's some major problems with the narrative that I was taught as an evangelical, I started deconstructing my faith. And then as my faith deconstruction brought me to finally reading all of the new atheist materials, Hitchens, Dawkins, Sam Harris, Dennett. And I just remember reading Sam Harris's book, A Letter to a Christian Nation. And I remember there's a passage where he says, because at this point I'm still trying to hold on to faith. I'm like, well, maybe I can be a progressive Christian. And then Sam Harris says in there, and for those of you who are you progressives, Christians who like to dress up in your robes and play church, he said, you are giving cover to the fundamentalism of religion that's destroying this world. This is post 9/11. And at that moment, I became an atheist and walked away from faith in God altogether. Also on top of it is, of course, being a gay man. My community didn't want to have anything to do with me. I have a brother here who was sitting in the front row here who was told by one of the local churches here, you can come here, but you'll never be able to work for us. And that would basically be the place. Maybe I'd be lucky enough to be able to attend a church. In the world I grew up in, I would be thrown out of any church. I would have been thrown out of my Christian school. I wouldn't have been able to serve in the military. All these opportunities would have never been afforded to me. So I was involved in politics for a long time. I ran for office, I was a political consultant, and by the time I'm 25, I'm burned out. So in Northwest Indiana, just outside Chicago, it's a very culturally conservative area. So the only place where there's culture was the Borders bookstore in Highland, Indiana, which had this interesting mesh of people. There were evangelicals and there were queer people working at Borders. And I thought, I'm 25 years old, all my other siblings are married off, I'm sticking out like a sore thumb. I need to find my own community. So I said, I'm going to get a job at Borders, and I'm going to build my own support system so that I can come out of the closet. So there's a lot I've been saying there, but basically that's all the stuff that's battling. But you also understand this parallel story is I'm also studying Mormonism, first as a believer, then as a skeptic, then as an atheist. And so my main study of Mormonism was while I was an atheist, and felt like Mormonism really is like the most advantageous foil for undermining Christianity. And so as an atheist, I relished in studying more and more and building it up and just show, look, if I can show that this is a fraud, then I can that Mormonism is a fraud, then we can show that all the arguments I can use to disprove Mormonism, I can also use to disprove Christianity. And you can pretty easily, actually. It's pretty surprising in one sense. But again, I'm dealing with the natural, and I'm just looking at the facts as they are. I've completely pushed aside anything spiritual, supernatural at this point. I'm a naturalistic thinker. And so, what becomes so weird though, is so I've suffered depression for most of my entire life, as you might imagine.
I can't imagine why.
But so here I go on the biggest Mormon podcast 2 years ago. It's called Mormon Stories with John DeLynn. And you have to understand that I started my YouTube channel 3 years ago, didn't know a single Mormon. And at that point, when I was still thinking of starting the channel, I would have categorized myself as an agnostic, okay? And the one thing that really struck me was during this whole time where I was suffering severe, severe depression, and my mom's here, she's witnessed this firsthand, is the only thing that really kind of kept me alive was Mormonism. Because I recognize that when you are somebody that finally decides to off yourself, it's because you've lost interest in everything, including life. So I think that there was a defense mechanism going on here within my brain that was saying, keep studying Mormonism. Why? Because it's the only thing that's going to keep you alive, Steve. So here I go on Mormon Stories. I have less than 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. This guy's huge. He's the Joe Rogan of Mormon podcasters. He befriended me when I had 23 subscribers, so I got on his radar screen almost right away. So I do feel that's the providential aspect. I do believe God's hand was on this the whole time. And he says, I'm going to give you a full week on my program. He never did this before. So we taped 5 episodes over the course of 2 days, and then a couple weeks later is Monday through Friday of Mormon Stories. And we saved the big reveal at the end. So I purposely told John, I said, I don't want to say that I'm gay until the last episode. Because I don't want people viewing me through the prism. Oh, like an evangelical's watching the show. Well, forget that. He's gay, so I don't have to pay any attention to him. So I go, and the last episode is how Mormonism saved an evangelical's life. And within the first 5 minutes of that episode, I came out of the closet as a gay man. And then explained how Mormonism saved my life, and my phone exploded when that episode aired. Heard from people throughout the world telling similar stories. And one that really stuck out for me was there's a person who commented on the video. He says, I was raised Church of Christ. Church of Christ. And I didn't think it was possible that you could be a Christian and a gay person at the same time. But after watching Steve's story, I am now convinced otherwise. So this has fundamentally changed the conversation in my world, within the evangelical world, because they could tell. They say, we see that the Spirit's operating in you. We see that you have a testimony of Jesus. And I can't deny that. I can't unsee that. That's why I was so deliberate in waiting to spring that on at the very end.
You shared with me that you always, or at least for a part of your life, believed that you were, the term that we would use years ago would be calling. You had a calling towards ministry, but deep inside knew that it would never work out, and experienced kind of the rejection of that. What was that like?
Well, I recognized that I could never be a pastor because I was a gay man. So in my mind, I would delve into politics as my ministry. Let's save America. America's going to pot. Oh my gosh, we need to get Christians involved in politics to save our nation. And this is a Christian nation, and we need to reclaim that. I mean, I was there at the very beginning. I mean, you have to understand, I interacted with Ralph Reed of the Christian Coalition. I was plugged into the evangelical world. I saw where this was going. In one sense, what we were trying to do was take over the Republican Party, and we successfully, hey, guess what? We won. We fought off when I say we, in my mind, we got to get rid of these country club Republicans, these Rockefeller Republicans, and we need to take over this party, and we need to take back America. And that's precisely what we did. We ended up taking back America. We ended up overturning Roe versus Wade. We ended up, a lot of our agenda got fulfilled, including Jerusalem becoming the capital, recognized as the capital of Israel. I mean, we won. And look what the hellscape that America has become.
Just let that sit. Just let it sit, Steve. So then you became an atheist, and then talk about when you came back to the evangelical village.
Okay, so I effectively left the evangelical village for 20 years. And then I come back, I start walking back to the village, and I look and I see it's on fire. And it ain't Holy Ghost on fire, it's on fire. Yeah. And my people are a mess. And so my return back to faith was right around COVID times when I live in a Christian community in this area. I'll just leave it at that. And I'm sitting at the pool, and COVID's going on. And all of a sudden, I'm hearing all these evangelicals start talking about sex trafficking, vampire cult, QAnon stuff. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And I'm like, and then I'm sitting here, I'm an agnostic. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to swear. Is that okay? Okay.
Listen, only Jamie G's allowed to do that, but that's all right. We'll give you a pass.
So I was just like, why am I, as an agnostic, sitting amongst all these believers? And the Bible tells us that in times of tribulation, we are to have a peace that surpasseth all understanding. And I thought to myself, why do I have that peace? And these Christians are in fear. And then I'm like, and this is as an agnostic, I'm almost thinking, man, these people could use Jesus.
Preach. It's like you're reading my whole mind.
You know, and this is what's so remarkable, Pastor Dan. So I started having this vision of a church. Now, you have to understand, when I first started this whole thing, God told me, don't make any plans. I mean, literally, it's fly by the seat of my pants. God said, don't make any plans. So when I post a video, I have no idea when I wake up in the morning what video I'm posting on my channel. I might even tape something an hour later, and that'd be the video. And so God told me not to make any plans, so I don't. But I started having this vision of a church, because one of those other people that commented on my Mormon Stories interview was, Steve, I'm an atheist, and if you were to ever start a church, I'd go to your church. And I'm like, that's interesting. So God showed me this church, and I thought, okay, if I were to build a church, what would it look like? Well, we would be inclusive of everybody, including atheists. We would have a lot financial transparency. As a podcaster, I would do interviews during the church service, maybe open it up for Q&A. And I just had this long list of all these different things that if I were to build the perfect church. So last fall, I'm literally going through a trauma because I'm being attacked by a bunch of evangelicals. And my mom and I were having some issues with some house remodeling going on. And that Friday morning, I wake up at 5 a.m. and I can't get back to sleep. And I realize, oh, shoot.
There you go.
I'm doing better, Pastor.
Good.
I'm processing trauma right now. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? So I post on Facebook, hey, I'm having some issues. And I hear from Latter-day Saints throughout the world say, we're praying for you. And ex-Latter-day Saints, atheists, they say, we're praying for you. I had Mormons say, we'll put your name in at the temple to be prayed over. All this kind of stuff. And then the next morning, I'm with the one person, Tyler, or does the show, the Out and About Sarasota.
Tyler Butler.
Yeah. And I've been in touch with him, and he invited me to go on this queer show in St. Petersburg that Saturday. And I'm thinking, I'm still processing trauma. I'm about to pick up my mom at the airport, and our house is a mess because of this remodeling job that was a disaster. And I'm just like, what am I doing? But I thought, you know what? I go to this gay bar, film a show wearing my Jesus shirt, and I loved it. You know, I'm going in a gay bar, and I'm wearing a Jesus shirt, and I have all these queer people smiling. Some are a little like, and others are like, I like your shirt. So I'm dealing with my queerness. I'm dealing with picking my mom at the airport, and I'm full of rage as well, what's happening. And then I wake up Sunday morning, and my mom goes to me and she says, aren't you supposed to go to church today? And I wasn't planning on it, and I normally don't go to church that frequently. And then I thought about your church, because Tyler had told me about your church that Saturday, and I had forgotten because I was originally supposed to go the month before, but then the war in Israel broke out, and I ended up covering that during that weekend, so I didn't go to your church, and I totally forgot about your church. Tyler brings it up to me. My mom says, aren't you supposed to go to church? And I thought, I think I'm supposed to go to church this Sunday. Well, then I walk in, and I come in late, and I notice that there's 2 chairs set up. Oh, he's going to interview somebody. And then I notice that there's a lot of people here in this room that normally aren't welcome in the evangelical church. And you have to understand, I'm thinking to myself, because I'm being attacked by evangelicals, I'm like, I don't even think I want to be called an evangelical anymore. I think I'm just going to quit calling myself an evangelical. But guess what? He has this guy named Tim Whitaker of the new evangelicals. So you guys do your interview, and I'm, of course, I grab the microphone first because that's what I'm going to do. And I ask the first question, and I introduce myself to this congregation. I'm a gay evangelical Mormon podcaster.
I remember.
And 99.9% of evangelical churches, if I went into, I would not receive the smiles that I got from this congregation when I introduced myself. So I knew almost like this is a church home. And so then I go and I talk to Pastor Dan afterwards, and I said, oh, by the way, I don't believe in church membership. Oh, we don't either. Another box is checked. And then I find out there's not only LGBTQ people are welcome to this place, but atheists are welcome to this place too. And then you're like, yeah, we're going to do some more financial transparency. We're going to start, you started talking about different ideas that you're going to do. And I'm like, man, this church checked off every box. So in my sense, I thought that I was building a church in my mind. Parallel to that, this church is doing exactly what I had in my mind. So in my sense, because God even told me, he said, you can think about, because God said, don't make any plans. But he said, but you can think about that church. He gave me permission to think about that church. And then he said, it's going to be a lot different than what you imagined it to be. And that's when I realized, like, oh, I found that church. God showed it to me. And at the moment that I needed it, the moment I was about ready to chuck being called an evangelical, I am introduced to the concept of being a new evangelical. And this is the thing, Pastor Dan. The evangelical church is dying. Okay? It's dying. And people are checking out. And the young kids, they don't have anything to do with it. But I do believe because even John DeLynn of Mormon Stories brought that up to me. He said, I told him this church is dying, but I said, but as Christians, we believe in resurrection. So I believe the evangelical church has to die in order for it to be resurrected. Because what we did as a people, we traded our prophetic calling to be salt and light to this world. We traded it for raw political power. And so that's why I didn't think this church was even possible. Like a Mormon went to me and he said, a Mormon scholar, he said, if I were to write a fictional account, you would be an impossible character. You would not be a believable character in a work of fiction. And in one sense, this church shouldn't exist, Dan. You should not be pastor of this church. And this building shouldn't be here. And so to me, this is the unicorn church. This is the unicorn podcaster. This is the unicorn church. But guess what? It's a miracle that we're having this conversation right now. I believe that the hand of God is on this. There's no doubt. And I just want to point out, we have sister missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormons, here in this building. For 200 years, there has been this war raging between the evangelical community and the Mormon community. For 200 years, we literally were killing each other. We massacred them in Missouri. They massacred us in Utah. We were killing each other. And for 200 years of evangelicals and the Latter-day Saints going like this, I think that God placed me at this point in time to start a new conversation with the restoration. They refer to themselves as the restoration. And I don't think it's coincidental that all the 200-year anniversaries of Mormonism has started at this decade and goes to the end of this decade. And so in this sense, the impact that I'm having in the Latter-day Saint world is explosive. Like I broke one of the biggest news stories in the history of Mormonism just a few weeks ago. And here I am living with my mom in a 50-year-old mobile home. I drive a 15-year-old car. I buy my T-shirts at the thrift store. All right? I have 2 or 3 pairs of jeans. I'm just, there's nothing about me that's spectacular, But I'll tell you what, I am so blessed to be put in this privileged place. And I want to just share this. I was talking to a Christian brother who's also similarly minded in this endeavor, because there are more and more evangelicals now that are embracing this movement of encountering the restoration with love and with the Christ-like attitudes. And I told him, I said, there's so many of these, you have to understand, the Christians, what they do to these people is atrocious. They stand out in front of their temple grand openings and they hold signs mocking them, saying you're going to hell, and they're horrible. And they do it right now. This is General Conference weekend in Utah, and outside of General Conference, where there's 20, 30,000 people there are evangelicals right now protesting outside, making fun of them. And guess what? If you're a Mormon and you're walking past these protesters and you look at them, you're going to be like, you know what? If I were to ever leave this church, I will certainly not join theirs. And you need to understand that Mormons, when they deconstruct, they go straight to atheism. But this is the beautiful thing. I have become friends with some of the most precious, wonderful people in the world. Mormons are some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And I see so many of the fruits from them that I rarely see from those protesters outside of the General Conference. And I went to this brother and I said, the beautiful thing about us is that all those haters and apologists and critics will never see what we get to see. They will never get to be in a room with a Latter-day Saint and hear their story and talk about and hear what the Lord has done for them. And I said, the beautiful thing is we get to see the pearls of the restoration, the pearls that they will never see. And one of these pearls is this beautiful painting. So a Latter-day Saint reached out to us, and he wanted to share this painting. And the reason I brought this painting up, Dan, was because the interview I did with you shared a painting of a very improbable painting, too, of when I believe your father or somebody was giving a sermon here, and there was this man who comes from like a voodoo type of religion, right? And he's painting while the pastor is talking, and he paints these remarkable paintings that mirror the sermon that's being taught. And you understand, this person doesn't understand English. So he shares that story on my channel. Well, here we have a Latter-day Saint who has a vision of Jesus. And he commissions this painting because he wanted exactly how it looked. It's a beautiful painting. This is a pearl of the restoration. And this is going to be on a cover of a book that my mom is helping with. And it's just a beautiful story. And here my mom, she was involved in the charismatic movement since the 1960s, before I was born. They were with the Christian Reformed Church, Dutch Christian Reformed Church, staunch Calvinists. And they got involved in the charismatic movement. One of the leaders of the Christian Reformed Church, who had a big radio ministry, attacked my parents. So we know what it's like to also see the hatred, because during this period of time, when John Ankerberg was doing programs in the 80s against Mormons, the next week, guess what he was doing a program on? Those charismatics, they're not Christians either. So in many ways, the charismatic renewal movement shares many of the same enemies.
What's your mom's name?
My mom's Betty.
Betty, we're glad that you're here.
Please stand up.
The best thing that you... The best thing you ever did was raise a boy that thinks for himself. And the worst thing you ever did was raise a boy that thinks for himself. But we're glad you did it. We have to end because we're gonna run out of time. We'll do this again, though, I promise. I want you to speak to this congregation for a moment and encourage them. Why is it important that we, as Harvest, continue moving forward? What would you give us both as advice and encouragement?
So I think we are on the precipice of this year, 2024, is a crucial year. Because whatever happens this election, this country is going to be torn to pieces. And there's going to be a lot of evangelicals who are going to be disoriented. They're going to be questioning a lot of things because they've been lied to for a long period of time. And then there's also disaffected evangelicals who say, I don't support this whole situation going on in our party. And literally my party, the Republican Party, is no longer the party that I recognize. And evangelicalism in many ways is no longer the faith that I recognize. But I really feel it's important that we don't turn our backs on people that are different than us, that we acknowledge that we're all fellow image bearers and we love them where they're at. I have a friend talk to me on the phone. He said, I won't be a friend with somebody who's a Trump supporter. I'm like, oh, you don't get it. If you want to reach out to people, you got to be friends and neighborly to everybody, including your enemies. You miss the point of the Christian message if you say you can't be friends with somebody that's different than you. This is both sides of the aisle. So, you, in the past year, this church has grown 250%. So you're doing something right. And I do think that growth is going to continue, and I think that there are going to be other evangelical churches that are going to catch this same vision. Trust me, there are plenty of other pastors that are just like you, but they're trapped. They're trapped. You blew this whole thing up. Harvest died, but then it was resurrected.
Come on, that's great. Will you give Steven a hand? Will you do that for me? I know there's more, but that was great. I'll give him a good taste. Appreciate you, my friend. Well, we are glad that you have pushed through so many bouts of wanting to end your life, because you're a gift to our congregation, and we are glad you're with us. And there's a lot more things for you to do and say.
Thank you, my brother.
Support you.
Well, just one last thing.
Of course.
The main name of my YouTube channel is called Mormon Book Reviews. So make sure you subscribe, because we're closing in on 10,000 subscribers. And we're still a small channel, but the impact we're having in this world has been tremendous. And I do believe God is starting a new conversation.
And you'll go to heaven. Tell them that.
Oh, but we're going to heaven?
If they subscribe, they go to heaven.
If you subscribe, of course. Yeah, and of course, I accept donations as well. And hey, I can raise money too.
Hey, we love you guys. We'll see you at Embracing Our Differences. We got a lot of stuff happening. Yes?
Who's planning on going to Embracing Our Differences?
Raise hand.
Okay.
Way to put him on the spot.
I might be a little bit late, so wait for me underneath the awning. I'll be there. And also, Jamie G cannot do guitar this month.
Yes.
So
Just something going on. Yep, well, we have that out on our social media. Hey, we love you guys. One more time, let's put our hands together. We love you, we appreciate you, and we'll see you next week. God bless.